And we're live. It is Monday. It is March 31st. It is the year of our Lord 2025. Alicia Wanless has a tolerant, vaguely amused look on her face. It is 8 a.m. Eastern Daylight Savings Time. What does your mug say today, Alicia? New Forces Get Canada. Oh, WWW Forces. I can't read it. Something.
It's
It's a
a
wet.
Canadian Forces mug.
Okay. She's got a belligerent militaristic mug. Ev is vaguely out of focus, um, which is kind of cool. I like it sort of captures an important aspect of her personality. I think you may need to create a wipe a smudge from your camera. And I spent the weekend doing two things. First, I was laid a lot of Canadian hardwood boards in the cabin in the woods, which is coming along. And you can see, if you look at the picture on Dog Shirt Daily, that the project of, busting the tariffs by building the cabin in the woods is coming along one floorboard at a time and one lower back strain at a time, but it's happening. And then on Sunday I came back, or rather on Saturday I came back to Washington, and I spent yesterday very reluctantly doing my taxes, having coffee with a friend who's one of the many victims of the situation, and launching my new project. And I want to monologue briefly about my new project. You got these two tectonic plates. They are crashing into each other. Will they create a subduction zone in which one plate crashes underneath the other plate? Will they create one of these things where it's like, the Hawaiian Islands crop up? I forget what that's called. Where it's, a whole lot of new stuff gets created and it goes up and reaches the surface of the earth and bang. Or will it create just kind of chaos? And I don't know the answer to that, but we got the Trump plate and we got the Ancien Regime plate, and they're heading, they're crashing into each other, and it's creating all kinds of crazed chaos. And I am going to write a diary of the seismic activity. And that's what I began yesterday, because we are not allowed to have fun anymore, but we are allowed to journal about it. And we used to call it having a diary, but now we call it journaling. And I'm doing my journaling on Substack. And, so here we are, one of the revolutionary features of the show, because, you are watching Dog Shirt TV, and it is a freaking revolution in morning television. And one of the revolutionary features of the show is that we have both of our Canadian co-hosts here today, and therefore are in a position to do our weekly update on the Canadian elections. And therefore we will do that. And another one of the revolutionary features of the show, because there are so many, is that Nastia has joined us, and we are therefore in a position to workshop the last episode of Escalation, and we're going to do that too. And a third revolutionary feature of the show is that we are in a position to journal about our feelings as the tectonic plates run over each other. And so that is what I'm doing on Dog Shirt Daily these days. Folks, we're not allowed to have fun anymore, but there is a Canadian election. And if I ever seek political asylum in Canada, it will be in Prince Edward Island, which is the smallest and least densely populated Canadian province, or most densely populated Canadian province. It has only 154,000 people, and when I move there, it will have 154,001. Alicia, how's the race for in PEI going?
You know I have no idea about the specific race in PEI, but maybe
What about you, Ev? Have you been following closely the Charlotte's? Is it Charlottetown? See, I know my Canadian provinces,
because
and
that's
their
where Confederation
capitals.
was signed, right?
What's that?
That's where Confederation was signed, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's the home of the Confederates. It's like the Delaware of Canada,
Look at that.
except that it's more like Rhode Island. And being, but Ev, have you been following the Charlotte's town press to figure out whether Pierre Polyev has a chance in PEI?
No, I did not. But I did listen to a Globe and Mail podcast about like how the race is shaping in the eastern part of Canada. But it's kind of the episode is great. It's kind of false advertising, though. I don't think they're talking that much about the race. I think that they're more talking about the issues that people there are facing, and it's kind of pension for retirees and stuff like that. There's a student asking for free tuition fees, stuff like that. So I don't think that we're going to see a huge wave of conservative there.
Well, I have not been to the Maritime provinces since I was 8 years old. And the last time I was in the Maritime provinces, which was the only time, I took a ferry from Newfoundland to Halifax, and got caught in a North Atlantic storm. It was supposed to be 16 hours. It took 30 hours. And I have never thrown up like that before or since. I mean, just, continuous vomiting over a very long period of time. And I want to say that I love the Maritime provinces. They're one of my favorite parts of Canada, and they don't get enough love either from the rest of Canada, which kind of rolls your eyes when you talk about the race in PEI. See, look, now
everybody loves the East Coast.
She's denying it.
I just don't follow the federal election in PEI. I've never even been to PEI.
See, you don't. Some confederation you guys are.
Well, that is already a problem, and Danielle Smith of Alberta seems to be bent on making it worse.
Yeah, I'm just teasing you, Alicia. Well, prickly. So
8:09 in the morning.
Ev, have you ever been to the Maritimes? You're like
I've been to the Maritimes.
Yeah. I've never been to PEI. I've been in the Maritimes. Don't Don't shame us too much.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like most Americans have been to parts of the country that they're not from. So, it's now, all right, I want to workshop, Alicia, with you.
I've been to almost every province of this country.
But not PEI.
Not PEI. I will knock off Newfoundland this year, and I just need to get to the territories in PEI after that. Okay, all right. Whoa, puppy, calm down. All right, here is an important question for Alicia. It's okay. Now I've forgotten the important question. All right. Let's update on the election fund if you want.
Yeah, so let's do the election update, because Canadian elections, you blink and they're over. And we're covering this one, serious. Oh, I remember the issue that I wanted to talk to you about, but we're going to do the election update first. What is going on? Mark Carney keeps giving these important speeches saying things like the U.S.-Canada relationship is over, breaks my heart, makes me, I wasn't a Trumpist, but it's forcing me to become one. No, I'm joking.
There is a poll out that says that fewer Americans now see Canada as an ally. So something's happening, despite the level of advertising that the Canadian government seems to be putting
But
into
I've
the red
seen that
states.
there's also been another poll about like 1 out of 5 Americans wanting to become a Canadian, like become part of Canada.
Want their state to secede. Yeah, I saw that
Not
too.
like.
Is Canada open for business in that score? Like if Vermont decided to become part of Canada, is obviously the United States would have a problem with that. But is Canada open for business for an 11th province?
I think it would be really tricky. We would have to, like Confederation, everybody would have to be at the table to decide that. And also, I kind of think we don't really want to provoke that crazy elephant.
Let's talk about escalation.
Yeah. I've been trying to see, I haven't looked lately, but I've been watching to see if Global Affairs puts up a travel advisory. So far, the US has remained green throughout. And I'm like, maybe.
Yeah, tell that to that actress, Jasmine, whatever her name is.
I keep seeing more and more people say that they're like genuinely worried about travel to the US. I mean, I like had thought of like that because I keep seeing these like, I don't even know if this is real. I need to follow up on this research, but I keep seeing people say that like people would be like their people's visas would be revoked because there was like anti-Trump stuff on their phones. I've got plenty of that stuff from my phone.
Yeah, so it's not anti-Trump stuff. It's it's stuff that's misinterpretable as or is, pro-Hezbollah or pro-Hamas stuff is mostly or sometimes just anti-Israel stuff that's confusable as one of the two, like that Columbia student.
I mean, I've got that stuff that could be interpreted as, whatever.
2 Canadian singers had to do a purity test to get away from the cops.
I don't know about that.
So 2 Canadian singers from out east. I think they're from Nova Scotia or New Brunswick.
See, the Maritimes, man.
Yeah, nice people is the point. That's why it's specific of where they're from. They're 2 sisters who were on tour in the U.S. They got pulled over for distracted driving, which they don't deny, and then immediately it escalated. The cops took them out, stripped the car. It was a rental car, and when they didn't find any fentanyl, because it was all about fentanyl again, why
are you guys dealing so much fentanyl?
We're not. I don't know how many times we have to say that and offer statistics to back it up, but we're not. Okay, cool. You guys export more to us than we give you.
Yeah, well, so we're rectifying.
Why are Americans
the
asking for so
here.
much?
Why aren't they wearing suits in Greenland? So then at the end
we can get to that.
The 2 sisters are separated, and they both get asked individually, which country do you like better, the US or Canada, before they're like allowed to go off on their way. And this was state troopers. I feel like I want to say Ohio.
Well, let me just
I'm sorry, but that's giving vibes of like Russian filtration camps on occupied territories. Like, I'm sorry, but that's bad.
Yeah. All right, so let me the puppy is rattling the fence. So if anybody and now is expressing discontent. It's a very Ava vibe here, Nastya.
I just thought of that.
Yeah, so let's talk about the election. What is the current state of things?
Well, we have apparently Tory infighting. The Conservatives are infighting, and you've got some criticism from the chief of the Ontario party, who the chief staffer who helped Ford secure a majority for like the 3rd time in a row, criticizing them. And you've got some plagiarism accusations. You've got an MP in the Liberal Party trying to encourage people to get a bounty from China against his opponent. It's off the charts silly. And of course, you've got the Premier of Alberta down in Florida making jokes about us becoming the 51st state.
Can I ask a dumb question about the Premier of Alberta doing that? All right. So if you are me, you should not be joking about becoming any part of Canada becoming a state. But if you are the Premier of Alberta, and you actually represent a Canadian province, a whole one that is larger than most US states and actually has plenty, it's not like PEI, it has plenty enough people to be a state. Why are you joking about Canada becoming the 51st state rather than Alberta becoming the 51st state? I mean, it just seems like you're selling your voters really short here.
I'm taking up a lot of oxygen on Canada because...
No, I mean, I don't think I can speak for Danielle Smith. I am not sure I understand the way she thinks. I mean...
Well, should we go back a little bit with her? Because the last week has been a bit of an episode. So one, she made an ultimatum to the Prime Minister, basically that came down to if Canada bans plastic straws, they're going to secede. It's kind of the top line of that one. And then it came out that she gave an interview to Breitbart that said, she apparently said in Breitbart that she asked the administration to put a pause on tariffs because the tariff war was helping the Liberals get into office, and they shouldn't do that. So they should put a pause so that the Conservatives can get into office because Pierre Poilievre is, quote, more in sync with the current administration. Now, this blew up. She denied it. Breitbart released an audio recording of it, so it was hard to get away from. And then she continued to double down, saying that asking the administration to put a pause on the tariffs is not election interference or requesting foreign interference. And there's no problem with her asking for a pause because that, in fact, is asking them to stop the interference. And then she goes down to Miami where she starts making these jokes. If nobody's ever really watching us.
Well, I am. And that brings me to the next question, which is for Ev. What is your crazy moment in the Canadian election of the week?
I gotta admit, I haven't followed much. I had other things on my mind at the time. What was if there's one thing, I don't know if it's crazy. It's significant to see the shift in the way Trump talks about Mark Carney. I find it quite interesting to see that he might have only had a fight with Justin Trudeau and not necessarily with Canada. Now there's no governor of anything. He's talking about the Prime Minister and no 51st state mentioned either. So that's an interesting one. But as to the crazy stuff, I kind of turned it off for the past week.
What's the plagiarism allegation about?
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
No,
go ahead.
We're so Canadian. No, you do it. Mark Carney's PhD thesis from 30 years ago.
And how is that going over? Is that like Hillary Clinton's emails? Oh my God. Or is it like Trump spilling classified information all over the place? Who cares?
I gotta say, I find it really hard to tell how things are going down because all you get is kind of the media coverage, which is, a bunch of journalists and intellectuals talking about something. And then you have the polls and you have event attendance. And that feels like kind of the only factors you can get unless you're out talking to average Canadians all the time. So on one hand, it seems to me like nobody cares, but, Pierre Poilievre's still getting like tens of thousands of people or something out to events. So maybe they do.
I mean, I think that the most effective, like, I don't think anyone serious really thinks that it is a big deal. And like his former advisor went public to say, we passed it. It was fine back then. And plagiarism experts are saying like, it's really, really, at best, like, he wasn't careful enough, but like, he's not engaging in any misconduct. But I think that the most effective thing in this is to remind Poilievre's voter that he went to Oxford, and like that's it.
Snobby elitist.
Yeah, like, and Davos guy, and like it seems to be their point.
That's interesting. So he went to Oxford, which won't take you, and he kind of cheated there. That's
Yeah.
Yeah.
It feels like that was a flash in the pan, like an attempt. They're throwing spaghetti at the wall, essentially. And then this comes back to what the chief of staff, I think it's the chief of staff, Corey Tenick, who is with Ford's government in Ontario. He gave a speech recently to, conservative audience, but he publicly said that all of this focus on economics and cost of living and not seeing that the fight with Trump is really what's driving Canadians is going to cost Pierre Poilievre the election. And the fact that they can't get their shit together to turn on a dime to do a different campaign is going to be the end of them. And it does seem like they're struggling. But then over the course of the weekend, what you have is all of these conservative sources going to journalists complaining about all the infighting and the incompetencies of the campaign. And as one journalist was saying today on CBC radio, that this is something you normally see in the 5th week of the campaign, not the 1st week.
Interesting. And and how bad are the current polls for Poilievre? My impression is that the U.S. press is consistently overstating the degree of the liberal comeback, not in the sense that it's not real, or that Carney isn't running even or ahead, but that it's not obvious to me at all that the Conservatives would lose if the election were held today.
I don't know about you, Ev, but I just have zero faith in polls and actually question whether they should even be allowed during election cycles, because I think that they may be causing more harm than help.
Right, but they are allowed and they do exist, and whether we have faith in them or not, they do show significant movement, which is why we...
Do they, though? That's the problem. Like, they say this, but it might not be. So lately it says that Carney may actually inch to a majority. Some say that he's slightly ahead, and it's been kind of neck and neck. The other major poll was that there's been a massive shift in terms of satisfaction with government since the whole Trump tariff thing. From
and I think that
dissatisfied to satisfied.
And I think that the Dogford guy said expressly that that the infighting was leading Carney to a majority. So they are fearing a majority for the Liberal. And if I'm opening CTV News this morning, Mark Carney's Liberals open up 8-point lead over Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives.
Oh, so that's actually significant.
So I don't think there's any overhyping in the US. Yeah.
All right. Well, so while we are workshopping things, and we seem to have lost Nastia, while we are workshopping things, Ev and I came up with a projection operation directed at the Canadian Embassy that, Alicia, I want to workshop by you and see what you think. It'll simply say, "We're sorry, désolé," which is, for those non-Canadians, a joke on bonjour, hi. Nastia's back. And then under it, it'll be signed "Real Americans," in both English and French. What do you think?
I mean, it's nice. We've got to work on you saying désolé.
Yeah, well, we got to work on my French pronunciation in general, which is...
You're like Mark Carney in the French debate.
I think the word for my French pronunciation is déplorable.
Oh, wow.
Better. That was better.
It was great.
Meanwhile, Nastia is just flickering in and out, and
I'm sorry. My Wi-Fi situation is insane.
We're going to get to your Wi-Fi situation in a moment. So what do you think? How does the Canadian Embassy react if somebody unannounced shows up and projects an apology on the wall of the embassy?
That's a good question.
You can't call the Secret Service and say, do something about it. There's this asshole outside apologizing.
I think they would be surprised, probably, and going, making faces like Canadians do to the things that you say. And I don't think they'll do much. Because remember, even when you were doing this on the Russian embassy in Ottawa, like the police came by and they were super polite.
They were polite. It was like a parody of Canadian police.
I think what you'd have is somebody else call on you, like somebody who,
like, generally if you're projecting on somebody's walls and they're not complaining about it, nobody else gets to complain on their behalf.
In your country, I can totally see that happening.
Oh no, it's sovereign territory. The Secret Service are pros. I think it's going to be fun, and I think the Canadian, so they're taking out. The Canadian government is being super aggressive about advertising in the United States, including at the bus stop right in front of the embassy. They have tariffs are a tax billboard. And so I think they're just going to take it as a friendly gesture from a nutcase in this country. But anyway, it's going to happen.
We're going to amplify that. We're going to get it on CBC. I mean,
well, I'm just announcing it's going to happen on April 2nd, which is what Trump calls Liberation Day. So yeah, it's going to be Apology Day, and we're going to be apologizing not at the Canadian Embassy, but on the Canadian Embassy. And for those who are concerned about this, if the Canadian government asks me to stop, of course I will stop, because I respect the sovereign wishes of our allies. Yes, Alicia.
Are you going to post this on Blue Sky or somewhere where I can share it in advance?
Well, that I'm going to be doing it?
Yeah.
Oh, maybe I should. What do you think?
I think so, because then I will share it.
Oh, okay. Well, let me do the design. It's actually they're getting the various words in, and I have to check that Lady Laser is up to the task, because she's had some health issues recently. So
you've been overworking her.
Well, you name these lasers without knowing who's going to exhibit what characteristics, and then they immediately start conforming to gender stereotypes. And so I'm just going to, not, I'm just going to not comment on it. I'm just going to say, she's a handful. She's incredibly powerful. She's like a fearsome operator, but convincing her to actually do the work is a little bit of a problem sometimes. Whereas Lord Laser, he's a workhorse.
I think that you've got the opposite going on here. These aren't.
I was actually just gonna say that sounds opposite to me.
Stereotype.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
what you
named
just did
them.
is reminiscent of another guy in your country, in your city, actually, who recently tried to describe women appallingly.
I'm not describing women. I'm describing one inanimate laser that happens to be named Lady Laser. Just saying, all right, so we've now workshopped. So you think Sari du Soleil is a good um, is a good projection?
Yeah, why not?
I don't know. You do a projection, and then sometimes people think you should have had the comma over here or the
But you're going to have a comma. It's going to be like, sorry, désolé. And you're going to have the
right.
accents.
Yeah, I'm going to get the accents right.
Are you going
All
to do
right.
anything that indicates that you're American?
Oh, yeah, it's going to be signed Real Americans.
Right. So then, yeah, I think you need to do this. I want to inform members of the Canadian media.
All right. Well, I will announce it. Special. And the last time I did a special military operation directed at a embassy other than the Russian embassy, Nastia accused me of cheating on her, which I just want to say, Russian embassy, I haven't forgotten about you. Where that's going to happen too. All right, Nastia, are you there?
I'm trying to be there.
Did you hear my joke about other embassies?
No, I just heard you say that you haven't forgotten about the Russians.
Oh, no, because I said before that the last time I projected on a different embassy than the Russians, you accused me of cheating on you. And
Yes, I did. I did.
and and so look, there's just no doubt that the landscape has expanded. There are other embassies I've got to work on. There's that base of the Washington Monument, but
I'll
I
have to
have
just
not
grapple with it with my therapist. It's fine.
I have not forgotten that the Russian embassy is my first love. And, it's going to be a long summer of projections. So, Nastia, you texted me this morning a question about the finale episode of Escalation. And I said, let's workshop it on the show, because one of the revolutionary features of the show, and there are many, is that we can just work through scripting issues for a different show on the show. It's hard if you keep disappearing, but that's why Alicia's here to make faces. So what's the issue?
So I'm writing the final episode of Escalation. And in that final episode, we're covering like so much stuff. We're covering the lead up to the invasion, the entire war, and then what happened with Trump in the last few months. Excuse me. And so I'm trying to figure out a creative and interesting to listen to way to do this. And I don't want to cover anything that actually happened in the war because people know that story. Like, I don't want to talk about the battlefield things, the counteroffensive. Like, everyone knows about the Russian atrocities. What I want to cover is the fact that Ukrainians and Americans see the American role in the war completely differently, right? Like, at the end of the Biden administration, the level of, and especially now, like the level of anti-Americanism in Ukraine is so high, it's insane. And it's less insane now with Trump back in the office, but during Biden administration a bunch of people were looking forward to Trump actually winning just because they hated the Biden response to the war so much. And this is like completely insane to Americans. And I know that even people who are like studying this and experts and former government officials, even they, like, I have some friends who fall into that category who would come to Ukraine and they tell me like, dude, we did not realize that there is this level of frustration on like from Ukrainians about the Americans. And so we divided the last two episodes. The second to last is an episode about impeachment, and it's entirely narrated by my co-host Tyler, who's American. And so this last episode is going to be entirely narrated by me. So I'm thinking that maybe I kind of put on a Ukrainian hat a little bit for like a part of the episode and just kind of frame it around like, I don't want to tell you the story of what happened in the war because you know that story. I want to tell you about how, you know, the American administration, the Biden administration went from being like our biggest, most important, you know, most crucial ally to like a huge disappointment in the eyes of Ukrainians. And then I tell that story and I do it a little like not emotionally, but I don't hide my kind of like my personal side of it. Uh and in that I will also interview someone who is American, who's a former official, who will kind of take a role of like defending the American position, and I'll kind of like grill him out and I'll be like, why didn't the Americans do this? And he will kind of like explain it, and it will be balanced in the end, but I will definitely like make myself a part of it. So that's just like one option. Another option is I could just be an objective journalist and I could just be like, Americans thought this, Ukrainians thought this, they disagreed, blah blah. So sorry, this is a long rant.
Okay, so a few thoughts. And how are you situating this with respect to the run up to the war?
We will cover the run up to the war. I think the run up to the war is either going to be the cold open, and you know we have an amazing interview for that. Not to give away too much for people who are looking forward to the episode, or it's going to be like a part of Act One. I think it's going to be the cold open, but we'll cover like the American efforts in the lead up. Like we'll cover all the facts. Like we'll mention all the money, all the weapons and stuff. I'm just worried about the framing.
Okay, so you're imagining a cold up. For those who don't know the lingo here, cold open is when you just start and you start with a story. And so you're imagining a kind of cold open. The first part of the story is the run up to the war, US trying to warn Zelensky, this is for real. And then it gets into the conduct of the war. The conduct of the war, we're going to focus not on the not on the so body section number one is you talking with this official about how the US, this really robust and divisive from a US perspective, engagement was increasingly infuriating from a Ukrainian point of view.
There will also be the beginning of the first act. So before that section between me and the official, there is also a part with another great interview with a Ukrainian young girl about the first like days of the war, like how the invasion began and what that was like for Ukrainians. So there's also that section.
And then what happens after this first section? So is the so you have this, you know, Biden, who was seen as very pro-Ukraine in the US, is driving Ukrainians nuts. And then what's the second act?
I think it's gonna flow like I'll explain this story, and I'm kind of thinking of framing it like Ukrainians and Americans throughout the war kind of lived into different realities, right? Where Ukrainians like kept tasking, kept pushing, and Americans kept deliberating. And so I'm describing all of that, and then this official comes in, defends the American perspective. We have a conversation about it, and then I'm like, you know, here are the facts, but like regardless of the facts, Ukrainians were so like annoyed and upset that some of them even wanted Trump to win, and then he does win and things get exponentially worse, and then you know we transition to Trump.
What do you think, Alicia?
That's really putting her on the spot.
Well, no, I mean, I think it's really fascinating because there's multiple levels of people with different perspectives. Like one, I think it's clear and obvious why Ukrainians would feel that they are living in a different reality in the midst of war, seeking support from allies, and the allies being kind of like lukewarm or not really going all in or seeing the massive existential threat that is your existence. So that makes sense. I think there's an aspect here of the be careful what you wish for, right? In like seeing that or thinking that the Biden administration isn't doing enough or going far enough, and that, you know, stick it to the man doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a good result for you. I think there's like a third layer of the difference in American opinions too, because they're not uniform in terms of their understanding. There are many who were very supportive and would want to see more, and then you have ones who have bought into Russian narratives and say that they don't want to support anymore. And I think like the fact that all of these kinds of different perspectives can exist within different information ecosystems, but also how they affect each other across ecosystems is interesting to me.
Laura, what do you think?
My thoughts track with Alicia's 100%. Nastya, it sounded as if you were trying to get into the heads of ordinary citizens rather than describe, what happened historically in the war or is currently happening. So I was wondering, I guess it seems obvious, are you planning to interview people who represent an array of perspectives? Just what Alicia was saying. It sounds like it's kind of, you do that in other episodes, so.
But I mean, like, not really. We interview people who are taking part of the events that we're describing. And so we actually use like a fraction of all of the interviews we conducted. And so like we can't go and interview a bunch of people and then include a quote from like 10 different people, because like that just doesn't work from an audio point of view. And so I'm gonna have to like just play the role of the Ukrainian Civil Society, because it's like I talk to these people every day. I see these things every day. Like I'm confident that this is how many people feel here.
There is no doubt that she is right.
Yeah. So yeah. So it's like we don't have to go and conduct a poll. Oh, how do you feel about Biden? It's like I can see top Ukrainian analysts saying that Biden's policy was a failure, and so like it's like the level of this is so high that it's obvious if you're a part of the Ukrainian information ecosphere. So. But
all
I
right,
do. But we also do have an interview with the Ukrainian who narrates this. Who's not me. We also do have another interview. Yeah.
Okay, so let me give you some guidance. First of all, I have no problem with this as a framing. I do think you're going to want to bring out, both for accuracy's sake and for dramatic tension's sake, this tension has its roots in the pre-war period. That is your cold open, where the United States took this extraordinary step of laying bare in public a huge amount of intelligence, and Zelensky purported to deny it or to not take it as seriously as the US did. And so there's this kind of dramatic, I would say, mutual misapprehension in the first few weeks straddling the beginning of the full-scale invasion, where the US is saying, we're telling you they're going to freaking invade, and here's what they're going to do. And from a US perspective, Zelensky doesn't take it seriously, and he actually even publicly denies it. 2 days.
Publicly and privately is very different, though. There's been so much reporting now.
But that complexity is, and then the roots of the frustration with Biden are there as well, in the sense that the Ukrainians are, hey, you're saying this giant thing is going to happen. Give us the weapons to defend against it. Right.
Like,
and so,
like be preemptive, like do something now. And the Americans are like, no, we can't provoke Russia, so we'll wait.
Exactly. And so there's a the seeds of what you're talking about in Act 1 are already there in the in that. And so I would build it in. I would also you know, I would also weave through it a kind of this theme of looking at the same data and coming to different conclusions about it, right? That, look, from a US, and you and I have talked about this often
Countless times.
over the, from a US perspective, there are many outcomes short of outright Ukrainian victory as Ukraine defines victory, which is to say recapturing all of the occupied territories, plus reparations for, everything that we would call justice. There are many outcomes short of that that are big, big wins for the United States. And so part of the frustration here is that the objectives are not obviously the same. And,
yes, exactly.
when if you put Joe Biden under sodium pentothal and say, what would be a win here? He would say, we already have it. Ukraine
and
is sovereign.
And they already said that.
Ukraine is sovereign and independent, and Kiev was not taken in 3 weeks or 3 months or 3 years, let alone 3 days. And so I wouldn't say from the U.S. perspective, policy objective achieved, but it is not obvious that this, imagine Trump were able to get ceasefire in place, which I don't think he will be able to get, but that's a different matter. Imagine that he would be able to get it. That's a pretty big win from a U.S. policy, not the ceasefire, but the outcome is a pretty big win from a U.S. policy perspective, even as it is somewhere between awful and a disaster from a Ukrainian perspective. And so I think you have to be savvy about the differences between, like, it's fine to look at it from do it from a Ukrainian perspective and say, hey, this is my read on this, but you don't want to be unsophisticated about the fact that, like, this isn't a U.S. menacing Canada situation where you're just like, well, the U.S. is out to, there's a crazy leadership doing crazy things. This is more of a, hey, they're helping us in order to achieve certain objectives, some of which, but not all of which, are consonant with our objectives. And that's been true from the beginning.
I was just worried because from the very beginning of the show, we've talked about this, that, like, we're not trying to make a podcast about, another American foreign policy failure. Like so many podcasts about Afghanistan and Iraq. It's like, here's a story of how US messed up. Like, we weren't trying to do that all the way, right? Like,
no, but
every
that's not
episode
what you're describing doing. What you're describing doing is a candid discussion about the difference between U.S. objectives under the Biden administration and Ukrainian objectives, even as they were working in very close partnership. They had a different, there were differences, and those differences become accentuated as the U.S. objectives are not entirely, but substantially achieved. And
they're not even clear. That's a big part of the problem. Like, it's not even clear what the Biden administration was trying to do.
I think it's pretty clear.
What were they trying to do? Like, in the beginning, like the first year of the war?
I think if you'd asked them right at the beginning, they would have said, Russian defeat, don't blow up the world.
But they've never said that, though.
Yeah, but you don't say that stuff in public.
No, but even
And
from
what
like, but
and
even
the
from the
real question
reporting,
would be what
Russian
counts as
defeat.
Russian defeat? And
Exactly.
and I think if you had described to Joe Biden and Jake Sullivan and Lloyd Austin on the first day of the war, we can have Russia gets incrementally more territory in Donbass, um, and um, and the east, and captures, you know, a southern corridor to Crimea. But Ukraine is independent. Ukraine, Russia loses 700,000 fighting men, and Ukraine is um, uh, lives to fight another day as a sovereign, independent, democratic state with a Western orientation. Is that a win or a loss? No U.S. policymaker in April of 2022 is going to say that's a loss. And by the way, no European policymaker in April 2022 is going to say that's a loss. And so I think it's but if you say to the average Ukrainian nationalist in the street, all right,
Or
I
just
got a
an
deal.
average Ukrainian.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah. I got a deal for you. Russia takes more of your territory, but doesn't wipe you out yet. Win or loss. You know, that's not such
exactly.
a it's not such a great deal.
I
Um,
mean, yeah, I have thoughts, which is great because I have to write this script. But I
yeah,
think the
but
disconnect. Go ahead.
I think that's the framing. You got to figure out, and I think the connective tissue to the cold open is critical here, right? That there is mutual frustration from the beginning, and even as there is partnership, and that gets worse and worse. That tension gets worse and worse, even as there is close partnership through the whole war, to the point that some Ukrainians, a lot of Ukrainians, are, I wouldn't say actively excited about Trump, but are see opportunities in the insanity that really, really weren't there.
Yeah, that's that's what I'm gonna try and do. There's
And
just so much there. But we also have an interview with Timothy Snyder that I'm gonna use in this section, which is so good because it's
who's
Timothy
just
Snyder.
announced he's moving to Canada.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
shocked. I hate Toronto. Sorry, Canadians, but I really don't like it.
So
But
does
it's
most of
fine.
Canada.
Okay, great. Okay. See, I sort of grew up in BC, so it's in my blood to hate Toronto. Like it's just
It's a
different
norm.
worlds,
Only people from Toronto perhaps like Toronto, but that's the one unifying factor of Canada.
perhaps.
We all agree.
all right. So what else should we talk about this fine morning? We've talked about Canadian politics. We've talked about Ukrainian-American relations and how to frame them in a podcast. You've all just seen a window into Nastia and my professional relationship, because this is almost exactly the sort of meeting that we would have in private.
It's also what we just talk about like when we have lunch. Like this is I feel like this is like 60% of our conversation overall.
Yeah, the other 40% is Ava. um,
And
and
Svalbard.
and Svalbard. Yeah.
I want to go to Svalbard.
So I have a question for you, Nastia, which is, why is there a grotto in back of you?
This is the first time I've heard this word, but I assume you're referring to the statue thing.
Yeah, it's almost
Just
like you're in a very deeply Catholic country where there were little shrines to the Virgin all over the place.
sort of. Yeah, I'm in northern Poland in a little like town called Sopot. It's near Gdańsk. It's like 15 minutes away from Gdańsk, which is a bigger town that no American has ever heard of course. But it's really nice because it's like a, how do you call it? It's like a vacation town. It's like on the sea. And so everything here is like hotels and things for tourists. And it's really nice. And we're here. It's kind of random, but I'm enjoying
Okay,
it.
so here is a random fact about Gdansk for those who do not know. Gdansk is the old German city of Danzig.
I knew that.
People don't know that. They think of Gdansk as like where there are Polish shipyard workers who started Solidarity, which is true. But before that, it was, you know, a long contested um, uh, uh, place between Germany and Poland.
What you're saying is that people don't know history.
Or
By the way,
geography.
and that Fred has asked if you would talk about your book idea.
Fred has asked. Fred in the chat?
Yes.
You have a book
Fred in the
idea?
chat.
Yes, I'm writing a book as of last night.
What?
Alicia, why don't you ask
have
me
not caught up.
questions about my book idea?
Ask you questions about your book idea. So how are you going to go about documenting this, future Mr. Next Johnson?
Future Mr.
Samuel
Next.
Johnson, diarist.
Oh. I don't know how I got confused with Samuel Johnson, but
Is it Samuel Johnson? I'm sure it is.
who did what?
Never mind. How are you going to go about documenting it? What's going to be your...
Well, so the first issue is to observe that it is happening, right? And a lot of what I write is about this. I just haven't oriented it toward there is an attempted regime change going on in the United States. Let's take seriously the regime change as such, right? Most of what I write is about this in some sense. But what if you orient the questions a little bit more in that direction? So that's the first thing. That's just a subtle question of emphasis. But the second is if you say, all right, there's two models here. And I'm going to shift from the tectonic model to the military model. You have a rapidly expanding, let's think about it in terms of an empire grows very quickly. The empire may be the Mongols, which then proceed to rule, you know, most of what is now Asia for 800 years. Could be the Romans, right, who expand methodically and then rule over the Mediterranean basin and a lot of Europe and North Africa for 1,000 years. Or it could be the Japanese or the Germans or the French in 1812, right, who expand in this supernova-like way that looks like it may be super permanent, you know, 1,000-year Reich, right, but then collapses within a very short period of time. If you shift it out of the military model and you talk about the Ancien regime comes back, right? The Bourbons didn't turn out to be done after you cut off a bunch of their heads, right? It turned out to have a little bit more life in it than you know, you would think when it's Thermidor.
Like your
And
Confederacy.
so, what's that?
Like your Confederacy.
Yeah, exactly. And so my question is, like, in 1942, it is decidedly not obvious that this is a supernova, whether you're talking about Japan or whether you're talking about Germany. You could be looking at the Mongols or the Romans, and they thought they were. And so my question now, to take it out of the military context and to put it in the context of U.S. domestic politics, is, are we looking at an actual regime change in which you are displacing one set of constitutional norms and rules of governance and replacing them with another one that is much less liberal, much more personal, much more, you know, or are you seeing an attempt at that that is going to fail, and by failing, either reinforce the old regime or reveal its vulnerabilities in a fashion that cause them to develop certain new capacities to resist these? And I think if you the ambition is to chronicle the current period with that question in mind. That is, there are two regimes vying for the authority to rule the United States and to exercise its power. And what is the, instead of getting bogged down in the day-to-day outrages, thinking about the day-to-day outrages in terms of those larger questions. So let me give you, before we wrap, let me give you one example of that. Over the last 2 weeks, ICE has picked up a bunch of people off the street who seem to have in common that they are students who have expressed pro-Palestinian views or anti-Israel views. None of them has been deported. They have all been detained pending deportation. And so from a civil liberty, if you look at it from a civil liberties point of view, it's appalling, right? It's, you're yanking people off the street sometimes and then detaining them with no criminal charge for protracted periods of time, right? And so you can look at it from a civil liberties point of view. If you look at it from a constitutional law point of view, you have a whole different set of questions. But what if you look at it as a regime, from a regime change point of view? You say, there is an attempt to do this thing. It is successful so far in that these people are still in detention. It is not successful so far in that none of them has been actually deported yet. And, if you would want to know how that litigation plays out, to know which army, which tectonic plate is prevailing on that particular front. So those are some initial thoughts on the subject. We have got to leave it there. We've lost Ev, we've lost Nastia, but Alicia Wanless, you are a great Canadian, and we're going to be back tomorrow. It's going to be super fun. We can talk more about this. And by the way, do you want to tell us about your guest on Friday?
I wasn't prepared to, but my sneak peek will be that we will be discussing the narcissists in our lives.
The narcissists in our lives. And it's, of course, going to be not with reference to any individuals.
No, this is narcissists in your personal life. Boss, right. Spouse, relative.
That's what's going to happen. We're going to talk then. It's going to be fun. See you later.